Good morning. This is Nicole, and I am here to welcome you to Barcelona, where I'm going to be evaluating a student's theory exam. So this is very serious business. First, let's give you a short little tour of my teeny tiny little balcony. I'm way up on the 5th floor. Let's see, back here, way back there, you can see some cranes in construction on that end behind me. That is the Gaudi Familia Sagrada Cathedral in the back. Sagrada Familia Cathedral in the back. And here you have all these lovely balconies right at the top of the city. Won't go too close to the neighbors. And way down below is the street. It's pretty far down and it's a pretty small balcony. But in order to get to official business, official theory business. All right, so this student did very well in her theory exam. It's one of the last exams for the exam, practice exam for the exam. And I wanted to congratulate her for achieving 94.5. So to go through the different components of the exam, this student got 10 out of 10 on intervals. All right, that's awesome. And on rests, there's a teeny tiny little error on number 2 of the rests, filling in rests. And there was a little bit of confusion on the on one of the first meter questions. So the answer to the meter is not 8-4. 8-4 isn't really a time signature that we would see. More commonly, if you're going to go for something like 8-4, ask yourself, is there something else that it could be that maybe sounds a little bit more like maybe you see something that you've seen in the past? So in this case, it was a 4-2 example. We don't really see a lot of 4-2, 3-2, these kinds of time signatures these days. But one of the hints that you can take from a question like that where you're asked to identify the time signature is you can ask yourself if are they big note values? So if they're big note values, it might be that it's moving by half notes. So the half note is the main beat in the bar. So that's the case here. So it's a 4-2 example. Scales. All right. Apparently there was a funny looking whole note D flat somewhere in there in the D question. So funny looking whole note D flat. So just make sure that your notes are look like musical notes. I think that one looked like a half moon or something like that. Transposition, right, 10 out of 10, awesome. One funny thing about transposition is if they really care, and I haven't had any students who are marked like this in the past, but you never know when it's going to happen. But you want to be careful about stem length. So the stem length should go from one letter name, generally speaking, to an octave below that. So if it's a D, then you go up an octave to the next D. If it's a stem going up, or if it's a stem going down, it might go from an F to an F. Or 3 lines or 3 spaces is another way that sometimes we think about that. Chords, 10 out of 10. Awesome. Cadences, 10 out of 10. Keys, time signatures, and chord identification. The very first time signature, so you wrote it down as 12-16. In fact, it's an example in 3-4. Generally, the things that I am looking for when I'm trying to determine whether I'm in compound time, which 12-16 is, or simple time, is if it's compound time, very often you'll see dotted rests if they are complete beat rests. So in compound time, we're dealing in groups of 3, so a dotted rest would represent an entire beat of the rest. Another thing that I'm looking for when I'm trying to determine whether it's compound time or simple time is I'm looking for groupings. Are things grouped in groups of 3s? So if they're grouped in groups of 3s, you're going to see groups of 3 notes beam together. The other question is you can ask yourself, okay, does this work in compound time or does it work better in simple time? So if it works better in simple time, then that's going to hopefully be a little bit more clear to you, and you can kind of weigh them both and think which one is, because sometimes it's a little bit difficult to tell, and they intentionally give you questions that might be a little bit difficult to tell, to really ask you to mull it over. If you're not sure, circle it, go to the next question, and you can always return back to it. And sometimes when we return back to things, a question on an exam, it gives us a little bit more perspective, and we are able to return to it with fresh eyes. Okay, melody. That was a great melody. Awesome melody. Always get awesome melodies from this student. Let's see, terms and history, also amazing, amazing work. We'll just have to make sure that's all nice and memorized before your actual exam on Saturday. And let's see, analysis. The analysis was a little bit, there were some difficult questions here. So 7.5 out of 10 for analysis, which is still a very good mark. Question D. Question D asks you whether the notes move in parallel seconds, thirds, or sixths. So the answer here is that they move in parallel sixths. So how do we know that? Sorry, no, they move in parallel thirds. My mistake. I'm just trying to think back, and I got distracted by being in Barcelona. They move in parallel thirds. How do we know that they move in parallel thirds? So the interval between the two notes that are working vertically, so up and down, is going to tell us what the interval is that we're moving in. So if the notes are a third apart, and we see third, like that, as we do in this example, it's parallel thirds. If we see six moving like that, 6, 6, 6, 6, it's parallel sixths. If it's seconds, if second is a smaller interval, second, then it's parallel seconds. So with scales, we can move in contrary motion. We can move in parallel motion. So usually when we play scales, we play them in parallel motion so that the right hand and the left hand, if you're talking about piano, are both moving in the same direction. And so usually when we play scales, we play them in parallel octaves, especially when you're just starting hands together scales, so parallel octaves. So in that case, the two hands are moving in parallel, an octave apart. So in this case, that little segment of music has the notes in the right hand moving in parallel thirds. Yes, so that's the answer, parallel thirds. There's one little interval mistake on F, question F of the analysis. And I think that maybe you didn't realize that the left hand was reading from the treble clef there. So there was an F sharp to B flat interval that was mislabeled. The very last point is in question G, where they ask you to identify a chord. Just a tiny little careless error here. It's a dominant seventh chord, but you wrote D7. So I know you meant dominant seventh, but the actual sign for dominant seventh is that Roman numeral 5 followed by a 7. If you write D7, it actually means that you're playing a dominant seventh type chord with a D as the root. So we don't want to write D7 there, standing for dominant 7, unless it is a D7 chord, which is not. So in this case, we want to write Roman numeral 5 and a 7. Or if you want, you can write Dom 7 or dominant 7th, just to be super, super clear, because what we want to do on these exams is be really, really clear. So that's about all. Well done at 94.5. I look forward to seeing you at your actual lesson. And we'll just give you a little last view here of the street. And over there, you see some mountains and all these little balconies. It's pretty nice. The weather's beautiful. And I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.